I want to welcome everyone who's joined so far. We've got a great show for you guys. We're just kind of getting ready, but in the few minutes before we officially start, we usually have a little chat. And I thought I'd ask Anna about, we've got open studios in San Francisco at various places. ArtSpan is doing it. Anna, you've typically gone to these in past years, right? What
Yes,
do you like
almost
about that?
well, there's such a wealth of incredible talent all under the same roof. The ones at Hunter's Point are under the same roof. And of course, various other people like our colleagues, Fred and Gerard, who are having it in their own private studio in their home. So there's a variety there, but it's just always a very wonderful experience.
Yeah, I went to the Hunters Point Open Studio yesterday, and I wasn't going with the intention of like trying to book people to do this show, but I ended up talking to a whole bunch of artists, and one of them is Elvira Dial, who we had on the show about 6 months ago. She's going to come back. She recruited another artist to do a show with her, and that artist introduced me to two more artists. So we're going to have some shows coming out of all this. So it's kind of like a good way to scout talent, I think, for art viewing adventures.
Yeah, definitely.
But then we have all the art span events happening, I think this weekend, next weekend. And yeah, this our friends Fred Silverman and Gerard Boulong, I think they're going to have an open studio, and I will find out when that's going to be publicized, when that's going to be available, and that'll be in my email that I send out on Fridays. Anna, I know you've got some travel, but will you have a chance to do some of these open studios?
I'm hoping to. Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe Nikki, I should ask you. Do you go to the open studios, Nikki?
I've missed the last few. I got invited yesterday, and then it was an online one that Roger asked me to go
Oh,
to.
right, Roger Underhill.
Yeah.
And I am really sorry, but Roger's going to send me some of his images, and I think we'll have to find an opportunity to show them on Art Viewing Adventures. Especially since they got created
Mhm.
on the what's the name of the show? The other art show that Community Living Campaign has?
Um, there's Art with Elders
Art with Elders. That's what
that
it
comes
was.
on after our program comes Art with Elders. Yeah. And then the mission's getting ready to have all their altars on display. I'll look for that information and put it in the chat because that's really
Okay.
special. People were really hard. They're so dedicated to, honoring their elders that have passed. So those are very special and full of love and good energy.
Cool.
We've
Well, we are at 1 o'clock, and I think we should officially get started. This is Art Viewing Adventures, and we are going to be getting a really cool presentation on partners in or couples in art from my friends Anna Ewins and Charlie Goldberg. But first, Nikki, why don't you tell us about Community Living Campaign, our hosts?
Okay. Hi, everybody. You've probably all heard this so many
me.
times already, but if there's any new people out there, welcome. We're art viewing from the Community Living Campaign, who is a nonprofit in San Francisco dedicated to the advocacy of elders and people with disabilities in San Francisco. So we provide information and we do a lot of advocacy work. And a lot of our work is this being on Zoom, making presentations so that people don't feel so isolated at home and find new interests. And one of the other roles we play in the community is connecting seniors and people with disabilities to tech. And we're trying to shrink that digital divide. So if you know seniors that, are reluctant about tech, but they kind of have an interest, we can definitely get them going. So please put our link in the chat so you know a little bit more about who we are and what that's about. Yeah.
Yeah, and we of course you guys have all kinds of programs, and tonight at 6, my friend Richie Unterberg is going to do. I think it's like spooky rock and roll songs or something, some Halloween themed Halloween themed. Yeah, some kind of ghost got in my way of understanding that. But let's get on with this show, Art Viewing Adventures. We are joined by Anna Ewins and Charlie Goldberg, my good friends at the what I call San Francisco Unnamed Museum of Art, or SF UMA. located in downtown on Third Street. I'm not going to say what the name of the rest of the museum is. You'll have to guess, but it's known for newer art. So welcome back to Art Viewing Adventures, Anna and Charlie. How are you both doing today?
Really well. It's a lovely day, continuing our beautiful late summer.
Great. Well, why don't you guys go ahead and get us started? I think who's going to kick off?
I think I'm going to kick off. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to start with couples in art with Anna and I. And just to clarify, that's not a statue of Anna and I kissing. That's a different.
But you are friends. You are very friendly. I know
We
that.
are very friendly. I don't know that we're that friendly, quite frankly.
Not
But
yet, not yet, anyway.
right. So Anna and I had done a similar presentation. It's probably been 6 months ago now, where we looked at a number of different couples as artists who took all sorts of forms and shapes and sizes, and we just found it to be a really interesting subject. How it is often a sort of symbiotic relationship between the two. I'm going to start with a pair of artists that I'm hoping a lot of you won't know. We had Anna's going to do someone obviously much more famous, but these are two artists that I think are really interesting. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about Jean and Sophie Tober Arp. And this is a picture of the two of them. And we'll see lots of interesting art by both of them, but they both have a really interesting backstory. And they worked at a time that was really dynamic in art history. They did a lot of their work between the two world wars when Europe was in chaos, and there was just a lot of different things going on, which hopefully I will tell you about in just a moment. So we're going to start with her, just because I want to sort of more emphasize the women in the groups, because it tends to be the men who get more of the attention with these groups. So she was Swiss. She performed at the opening of the Galerie Dada. So it was a really important player in the Dada movement. If you don't know what Dada is, it came about after the end of World War I. And World War I was a time when it was just this catastrophic event in Europe. It was bad for us Americans, but it was catastrophic in Europe. And you would just see pages and pages and pages of names of your uncles, brothers, fathers, sons, and it was just horrible. And so there was this very strong movement against the traditional religions, the traditional government, the traditional ways of thinking that got them into this horrific war. And they developed this idea of Dada, this sort of absurdist idea where things deliberately didn't make sense. And one of the centers of this was the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich. That and the Galerie Dada were the two big sort of seed points for the Dadaist movement. And she performed at both of those. And she was known not only as an artist, which you will see, but she was also a dancer and a choreographer and a puppeteer. We'll get to look at some of her puppet things. The other things that she was famous for is she did a lot of theater design. And in 1940, when the start of World War II was occurring, she escaped to form an artist colony with Sonia Delaunay. And I'm hoping that we'll get to talk about Sonia Delaunay, depending on time, we may not. Unfortunately, she died fairly young of carbon monoxide poisoning, this tragic event where she missed the metro. So she stayed at a friend's house, sort of off in the woods, that didn't have good, there was something wrong with the stove. And she ended up, it was a very non-suspicious death, let's put it that way. It was not her husband trying to kill her off because he was jealous of her artistic talent. But I want to start with this particular piece, which is one of her most famous pieces. It's called Dada Head. And you can start to see how this really is emblematic of Dada. Well, we sort of can see that it's a head, but it could almost just as easily be an air balloon or something like that. You get a sense of the size of it by this particular photo that's on the right side. Anna, do you have any thoughts about this Dada head? Does it evoke anything for you?
Well, it sort of has a mechanical kind of a bit of a robotic look to me. Certainly, it doesn't look like anything to do with human flesh and feeling.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It has a certain mechanistic quality, and I think that a lot of the Dadaists were sort of interested in this combination of man and machine, human form and mechanical form, and I think this is a really good example of it. So this is sort of a sense of what one of her works are. And then we have this Dada bowl. And when I first look at this almost looks like a Buddhist bell or something like this. But the fact that it's turned over upside down, that fits right into the Dadaist way of thinking, that it's a bowl, and yet it's not a bowl because it couldn't function as a bowl because it's actually upside down. Rodney, have you seen this before?
I've never seen that before, and it's funny because I guess it does remind me of maybe the bicycle wheel from Marcel Duchamp.
Mm-hmm. Right, who again was a very important practitioner in the Dadaist movement. But one of the things that she's really known for is the idea of using textiles as art, which was very innovative at the time. And here you see these very biomorphic forms. When I use the term biomorphic, what I'm meaning by that is that they are forms that evoke nature more than something that evokes a machine or, and we're going to see later on, if we get to the second set of couples, we're going to see how machines and modernism play a big role. But here, this is almost as though we're looking in a microscope and looking at, bacterial forms or cell forms or something like that. But she was very interested in textile as art and became very important because of that. And what I want to show you here is just a little bit of a video. She was very involved in puppetry and would often use puppets at these Dada clubs. So just bear with me. It's not a really particularly long film, but you get a little bit of a sense of the kind of work that she did. Okay, so there you are. You're at some club and you're having your absinthe and drinking some sort of wine or beer or something like that. And then these puppets would come on, and you could see from the puppets that there'd be a lot of unusual shapes. Let's see, I might have to get out of this to get to my next slide. It's not letting me go to the next slide. Hang on.
Yeah, I'll just say that it's very kind of psychedelic. I think our Summer of Love community would have enjoyed that experience.
Oh, and I just got this message too late to move my cursor off the screen, so I apologize about that. Let's see if this will let me go to the next. All right, let me change it on my computer, and then it'll let me go to the next slide. So just bear with me just a second.
And what museum was that done at, Charlie? Do you know?
I don't know. I just found it on YouTube. And
Yeah, it's not SF MoMA, but it looks like it could be something like that.
right, exactly.
Anna, do you have?
I saw this exhibition at the Tate Modern last September.
Oh,
Yes, it was fantastic. I don't know if it was exactly this, but we saw the puppets and we saw the tapestry for sure.
Wow, I hope that maybe travels to the United States, and it would be
Yeah,
great to have
yeah,
it here.
yeah, yeah,
Sarah is telling us that it's a museum in Basel, in Switzerland.
yeah.
So that's what that is. So, so she used to make not only these puppets, but she'd also used to make these costumes. And this particular one, I saw this quote about this particular costume that has been suggested that the costume was richly colored in blue, red, white, and brown, as well as silver and gold. So again, you could just imagine this kind of Dadaist. There's a great movie which has Meryl Streep in it, which features a scene at a Dada club where she's supposed to sing the national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner, with all these crazy things going on in the background. If anyone remembers the movie, you can put that in the notes. But it was just this time of craziness. People were trying all kinds of different and fun stuff. But there was something called the Café aux Bêtes, and this was called the Sistine Chapel of Abstract Art. And it almost sort of presupposes this idea of form follows function that became a famous catchword of Bauhaus. But this preceded Bauhaus. And you can see these are photos of the original Café aux Bêtes. And one of the people who worked on this was Theo van Doesburg, who was sort of a colleague of the Dutch Mondrian. And you can see these kinds of geometric shapes and patterns. Unfortunately, the Germans were not enamored of this type of art. They called it degenerate art, and so this place was torn down within 10 years of it being built up. But one of the things that they tried to do is they really tried to decrease this idea of a hierarchy at this cafe, and that took its form in different ways. So, for example, the design of the chairs and the tables was every bit as important as the design of this beautiful staircase that we see here, or what was going on in the walls or ceilings. So it was this very sort of democratic. And I have a photo of it being restored. And if you're familiar with Mondrian, Van Doesburg would have been sort of similar to Mondrian, but you can see how this almost looks like a Mondrian type ceiling in it. I would love to go to this place and see it sometime. It just seems like it'd be a lot of fun. But now we're going to talk about her partner, who was Jean, or sometimes known as Hans Arp. He grew up outside of Strasbourg, and at the time it was this Alsace-Lorraine region of France, which is to say sometimes it was controlled by Germans, sometimes it was controlled by French. So if he was speaking to his French friends, he'd be Jean. If he was talking to his German friends, he'd be Hans, kind of like you, Rodney. You have your American name, Rodney. But in Europe, I think you're known as Jean.
Rodney.
Right?
And Rodney.
What is it?
Rodney.
Rodney. That right?
Yeah.
That's your European name. Depending on.
And I'm a completely different person when I'm referred to by that other name.
Yes, and I can understand why. But he was a really interesting guy. He was known as a sculptor, a painter, a poet. I'm going to show you an example of one of his poems. And he exhibited with Wassily Kandinsky. I think a lot of us may be familiar with that name. If you're not, he was really one of the early abstract painters. And one of the early movements that Kandinsky was involved in was called the Blue Rider Group. And Arp was a member of this Blue Rider Group. And he ended up moving to neutral Switzerland with good reason. There was just a terrible war going on, and so he was doing whatever he could to try to get out of the war. And in 1915 is when he meets Sophie Tauber, who we just talked about. One of the things that's so important in Arp's art, just like the Dadaists would have believed in, is this idea of randomness in chance in art. And we're going to see some of that idea. So this is a piece that he ended up doing outside of Harvard. Walter Gropius, who was a very famous Bauhaus architect and then ended up moving to the United States, was really fond of Arp and had him do this cafeteria work while he was in Cambridge. Here's the Cloud Shepherd, which is in Venezuela. This is one of his larger pieces. And again, you can see sort of the, again, I'm going to use that word biomorphic. I mean, this could almost be something that you would see floating around in a microscope. I'm going to read a bit of this poem that he wrote, and this is just a small bit of it, but I think you'll get a flavor for the type of Dadaist poetry that was going on. He is sitting in a circle with himself. The circle sits with its own body. A sack with a comb that stands serves him as a sofa and as a woman. Your own body, your own sack, the van, and the left skin. And tick and tock and tip and top, and the bride's own body falls out of the bride. He swings like a pound from his stone. Your own bridge in your own sack, your own body in your own circle falls out of tails, naked as a sofa. So there you go. That's a little taste of Dadaist poetry for you if you wanted to get a sense of what it was like to go to these kinds of clubs. But here's what he calls a chance collage. And it is literally nothing more than that. He cuts out these pieces of paper, throws them down up in the air, sees where they land, and this becomes his work of art. So that idea of chance is really, really important. And just again, in sort of the Dadaist feel or even the Surrealist feel, what he would do is he would often carve something or create something three-dimensionally, and he wouldn't even call it until he was done. He would start sanding down some form and working on it. Finally, when it was done, then he would come up with the title. Rodney, you have a question.
Yeah, I'm just Gail in chat has asked a couple things. She's noticing, first of all, that ceiling that you showed earlier reminds her of some 1960s fashion designer dresses, maybe by Dior,
Yes.
and it, probably riffing on Mondrian.
Exactly. That's a really great observation. Let's go back to it for a second. So Dior made a whole series of clothing based on Mondrian. So Gail, you are absolutely correct.
And then if you could move to the mosaic that I guess on the wall, she's asking, was the mosaic in the background designed to go with the sculpture, or are the two separate pieces of art? So maybe the go back to the sculpture, the biomorphic sculpture. Where's that other one? That one. Yeah. Were they made to go together, do you think?
Yes, they were. They were. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, he's an interesting guy. He was someone who would create art out of whatever he had in front of him. He was very, very, so, here's this piece called Shirt Front and Fork. And again, kind of crazy. This looks really more like a tooth to me than a shirt front, but, somehow, we can sort of try to imagine that from the work. And I love this, this is a perfect example of a title that came up after he created this: Sculpture to be Lost in the Forest. So, so we're sort of, by that title, he's sort of invoking something that's kind of landscape-ish. And yet, is it? I don't know. I think, if we put it out to our audience, I think they can see lots of different things within this particular.
Is it submerged in water?
No, I'm sorry. That's just that's bad slide making is what that is.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's a cool effect, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's not submerged in water. All right. So I'm going to now hand the screen over to Anna and let her continue. Unless there's any questions about the Tauber arts.
And they stayed married their whole lives?
Yeah. Again, she died earlier than she should have because of that accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. But they were really just a couple they were so important to each other and really fed off. Both of them were extraordinarily creative. They just had a real drive to create. So I see that Gail has this question: what were his sculptures made out of? His sculptures were made out of anything that he could get a hold of. He used all kinds of different materials. This particular one that I just showed, the one I think is a bronze sculpture. Another is made out of stone. He used a multiplicity of materials. He wasn't bound by any particular thing. Take it away, Anna.
Okay, let me share my screen here. And
You can go to the upper left-hand corner. Yeah, you go.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to talk about Picasso and Dora Maar as the couples in this presentation. Of course, Pablo Picasso had many lovers, and many of them were muses, and they were artists in their own right. And there's no way we could talk about all of them today. So I've chosen Dora Maar, who I think is a really interesting artist. And just as Charlie was saying, we often have with these partners in art, the male being the one that gets the most recognition. And that's, of course, true with Picasso's lovers and muses and artists. So here they are, the two I'm going to be talking about, Picasso and Dora Maar. Oh, before I go on, just a bit more of an intro. So Picasso had probably something like seven relationships that were very significant with his women, and Dora Maar was the fourth. And it was in the period of the 1930s to early 1940s, 36 to 43 to be precise. And during that time, he created some of his most iconic works, one of those being Guernica, that I imagine many of you know about, and another was The Weeping Woman, out of a series of Weeping Women. So they first met in Paris in a cafe. It was a very famous cafe that all of the literati and the artists hung out in, Les Deux Magots, the two magicians. And she was at the time, she had noticed Picasso, and she was playing some kind of a game with a very sharp knife, putting it, stabbing the surface of the table between her fingers in a kind of a dramatic, exciting way that got Picasso's attention. And they had a very complex relationship that was both full of passion, but also he was known to be abusive as a lover, and he was with her, including with her in the way he treated her. But very soon after they saw one another in this cafe, they started a really heated relationship. At the time, Dora Maar had already become well known as a photographer, and she had a commercial photography practice in Paris. And she was very interested in surrealism and had already started to do some work in that area. Picasso found her very intellectually stimulating, and he also learned quite a bit from her about photography and other techniques that he brought into his practice that we'll talk about. So very soon after she met him, she was allowed to come into his studio and actually take a photo of him, which was kind of an unusual thing. He was normally very private about who could come into the studio and who could photograph him. But here we have one of her works.
I got to say, I love that image of him, especially you just told us about the fact that he could be abusive. It's like these two sides of this man.
Yes. So, as I mentioned, she was known as a surrealist, which is to say, not that different actually from Dadaism in that looking at very illogical and non-realistic images, and bringing in the unconscious into the work. Here are a couple of her works that were done right before the shell was done right before she met him, and the one on the right, the shampoo petroli Han publicity work done for commercial reasons to illustrate this product for the hair. But let's look at this first one here. What do you actually see in this work?
Well, I look at this, Anna, and my first question is like, well, how did she do this? Like, I mean, I see this hand emerging from this shell. I kind of guessing that the hand is not a real hand, that this isn't some kind of like photographic effect. This is
Yeah.
something that she created and then photographed.
Yeah, and is it actually coming out, or is it come withdrawing? I mean, that's one of the things that's kind of ambiguous, don't you
Uh-huh. It kind of reminds me of the Addams Family,
Thing.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the sky behind, what does the sky convey? What kind of a mood or feeling does it portray to you?
Yeah, it's tumultuous, right? It's definitely not a calm sky. It's things are happening. This would be a good Halloween kind of piece, I think. She could have like definitely she should have been doing open studios around Halloween.
Yes. And what about the lighting? What do you notice about the lighting?
Yeah, I mean other folks can I see from Gail, hope, light, religious. She gets a religious sense from it.
Ah.
Um, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like the light is in different places, so it's not really consistently coming from one direction. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah. Would you call this to you? Would you call this aesthetically pleasing? Something you'd want to
Um,
be looking at, more than one
well, I
on your
think
wall.
yeah, I don't think it's repellent. I think it's kind of an intrigue for me. This is something that we'd have different opinions on. So Gail says creepy, disconcerting. Maybe it's something about me, but I find it kind of intriguing myself. What about you, Charlie? What do you think of this?
Yeah, I'm not repelled by it, but I mean this just fits in so much into the dogma of Dada and even surrealism, this juxtaposition of odd things. I'm not sure I would put this up on my wall, but I always like looking at things just to see, I mean, what they're trying to do is they're trying to sort of trigger your subconscious, where does this take you in terms of your connection with dreams and reality, and how does it distort reality. So I find it an interesting period of art, but I can certainly see why people don't like it.
We got some comments in chat. I see Leon says, I like the light composition. It does really add a lot to it that it's light in some places, not others. And then Peter and Kevin say, someone is trying to climb out of their shell. Yes, that's great.
Yeah.
It's a very, very cool metaphor, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. And then the one on the right, it was done for, it was a commercial project to advertise this product, this shampoo. Is it effective? I mean, what does it connote to you when you've got this?
It makes me think of the Clean Water Act, like this is what we were trying to prevent. It's just, I get that. I mean, maybe this is a modern way of looking at it, but I get a sense of pollution from it.
Oh. And for me, this looks like hair coming out. I don't know what
Okay.
you all think, but
Like Rapunzel's hair coming out of a bottle or something.
possibly. I mean, of course, shampoo is meant to clean hair, of course, but this itself, and this is really in surrealism. The hair was considered a classic sexual kind of imagery, very associated with women. If you cut a woman's hair off, that's very emotional and
The rape of the lock kind of thing.
yeah. So another very classic work of hers around the time that she met Picasso
And
was
if you could just go back, because Gail is saying that the one on the right is beautiful. Art meets advertising, very effective piece. Must seek meaning, which makes buyers remember image and your brand edgy. So those are the comments she had about that work.
Do others of you think this is edgy?
To me, of course, it looks like a zip drive getting infected by a virus. This is where my modern brain goes when I see this. But I'm not sure that this would make me want to buy this shampoo. but
No.
I mean, one thing that's interesting is it's a black and white photograph that she's colorized, right?
right,
Yes.
And I think it's like an effective way of doing that. You know,
right,
you just colorize one small part of the image. I think that's kind of cool.
right. And just a quick comment is, like especially if you look at the one on the left. I mean, we're so used to Photoshop and apps that are like that can create these things seamlessly. This would have been done with literally cutting and pasting different
Yes.
photographs together.
Yes,
So,
indeed.
it was a secondary skill that you needed to have, that I think a lot of photographers don't really use anymore. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great piece for the how was this created question that we like to ask as art museum guides.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So this next work, why they're not moving forward. Oh, I didn't mean that. That one, this one. This is another very well-known piece work of hers. I mean, maybe not well-known to you, but within her oeuvre, this is well-known. What on earth is this creature?
Yep, this is another great image for Halloween, I would think. Although I'll say to me it's not a creepy. It's kind of got a cuteness to it, a little bit of a like I wouldn't mind having this creature around.
Oh,
It reminds me of well,
Run
there's
that past Sarah
manatees.
first.
I don't know if I agree. I don't think I would. I would be cringing. Ooh.
Yeah, so
Aardvark
Art
baby.
Baby is
Yeah.
what Gail says, and early Star Wars from Sarah, and in Trasvina.
That's Nikki,
Oh, Nikki.
our very own
Looks like
Nikki.
a baby.
Yeah, it's like got that cuteness, right?
What do you think? Do you think it's based on an actual real image, or is it? I mean, is it a real thing? Is it
Well, I would say if it was
character,
done, if it
or
had been done in 1967 instead of 1935, I would definitely suspect that some LSD had been taken when this was created.
well, she would never say what it was, but many people think it was an armadillo fetus. An armadillo fetus.
Oh.
How about that? So where did the name come from? Well, there was a playwright in the late 1800s called what was he called again? Alfred Jarry, and he wrote a play called Ubo Roi, R-O-Y, King, in the late 1800s. And Ubu was a characteristic in this play, depicting the disgusting anti-hero who slaughtered the royal family in Poland. In other words, a very esoteric association, obviously. I mean, why she chose this, who knows?
But I just that's like a sinister thing, right? And
I
I don't
would
think
say so.
this doesn't seem like a sinister image to me.
Yeah.
So it's funny. It's funny. Maybe our 2022 eyes see this very differently.
So JT thinks the armadillo baby is so cute.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah. So anyway, this is again considered to be one of her most. She's known for those who know of her. This is considered to be one of her most known works.
Leon is chiming in saying it does look sinister to him, and I love art that we all see differently. That's great.
Yeah.
Destroyed Poland in play. She did in 1935 before World War II. What's the connection? Yeah, I didn't really know there was a royal family in Poland.
No, well, I mean,
Well,
not in recent contemporary history. Certainly not in the last century. In fact, Poland wasn't even a country between.
No, it was when Germany and Russia divided it up, and
Yes,
it would have been after 35. So it was a country in 35.
yes, between the wars, but before World War One, and for the previous 150 years, it wasn't. It was part of the Austria-Hungarian Empire. And anyway, so and I think back then it may well have had a royal family. I don't know that detail, but anyhow, like, it's curious to think why she chose this particular thing. I mean, who knows? I mean, I've never read why she did it. So, as I mentioned, she introduced techniques to Picasso from photography, from working in the darkroom that he that had never been he hadn't understood before. And this technique called cliché vert, and I think well, it's a combination of photography with printing. And Charlie, what does cliché vert mean? I know you know French.
Cliche is a photo.
Cliché,
Is a photo.
okay.
You know, I mean, we use it in the term of things that are overdone, but it's also a photo. And there is glass.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
so it's using some sort of glass technique with the photograph. Maybe the photo on glass. I'm not familiar with the technique.
So he this is one of Picasso's works that he produced of her, based on a photo of her, which is just using this technique.
I think it's an interesting contrast with her image of Picasso,
Yeah,
which has a kind of dichotomy, and this seems to have some kind of dichotomy also.
yeah. How would you say it has a dichotomy?
Well, that's the two eyes are so different.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's not quite the, obviously what she's done is like him and then the negative of him. And I guess for her, it's like making her seem multifaceted, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if you're going to use. Are you going to be using the image that we had at SF MoMA, Anna, that she did of it for two-sided women? No. Okay. Good. So I'll talk about that. But she does this photo that looks like sort of a straightforward photograph, and then like an ionized photograph to the side, and it's really reminiscent of some of Picasso's paintings of her, where you do see almost like a yin and yang to the face sculpture. And so I agree with whoever said that. Yeah, was it Rodney who said, this has this feeling of like, if you put your hand up in the middle, it is as though you're looking at two different types of faces.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a couple of things in chat. JT says, enchanting, Picasso observed and portrayed her so intimately. And then Gail is asking, so this is Picasso dabbling in photography?
Yeah, and in darkroom technique.
So we don't always think of him as someone who did a lot of photography, but I guess he did some, right?
Yeah, he did pretty much, I think, everything that was to be done. And I mean, in his his very long and very diverse career. Yeah. So moving on from the surrealistic and these images.
Gail says she really liked that photograph, by the way.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, Picasso had all these lovers, and the one right before him was still in the picture, even once he started seeing seeing Dora Maar. And the one before him was a Marie-Therese Walter. And he continued to have the affair going with two of them. And this was really common for him. He often had multiple things going on at the same time. And he apparently, on the one hand, tried to keep them apart, even though he was simultaneously seeing them. On one occasion, Dora Maar, came to his studio when Walters was still there. And he encouraged a fist fight sort of between them, and they were fighting, and he said it was up to them to choose. And anyway, so in this work, Bird in a Cage, he represented Dora Maar by the black bird, and the Walters by the white one. And who do you think might have won?
Well, you know, great artist, not a great guy. I'll say that.
Yeah, yeah. So she won basically, and then we see her response. This is in 37, and then a couple of years after they had met, and then in this picture here, Marr did a response to this work. In this work that she called The Conversation. So here is Walters and here is she. Why do you think she depicted them in this way, both one in the light, one in the dark, one of the back showing, the other at the front showing? What do you think symbolically that was about?
Well,
I think
they were different in coloring. Therese Walter was
With a blonde.
blonde, and you see that in a lot of his paintings. And she, of course, was dark haired. I love this painting. I think it's really, really intriguing. And I in particular like the light bulb. But I mean, here I think it's more borrowing from Picasso. I mean, if you think about that light bulb in Guernica,
Well, Charlie, I've also read that it possibly was that Picasso borrowed the light bulb from her in this.
Oh, so this was earlier in 37 then?
Well, the Guernica was being made in that's what I've read, and I think you'd have to know the month, and
Right.
I don't know, but I have read that. But you're right. I mean, they appear in both. I guess that's something just to be investigated more.
you know what intrigues me is that she would portray herself and her rival in a painting at all. Like that says a lot about her that she would even, I think a lot of people would just, that would be the last thing they'd want to portray at all.
And she wasn't particularly known as a painter, although she studied both painting and photography, but her most common medium was photography, not painting. But I think, Charlie, you mentioned the light and the dark being literally, one was blonde, one was brunette. But I think also there's a symbolic connotation to dark and light, isn't there, as well? I mean, you could say the light is the pure, the lovely, the dark is the sinister, and the less so. Or you could even say that she was in the shadow. I mean, there's multiple possible interpretations, I think, of the cover.
Yeah, it's interesting. What you were saying about her chosen art form being photography. Picasso actually discouraged her painting. He actively discouraged her. And so she sort of then gravitated towards photography as a different way. I've seen some of her painting. It's actually not bad. And probably had she had sort of a lifetime of painting behind her, would have been a really great painter. But I think, he really sort of put the kibosh on it.
Yeah.
Sort of his controlling way. There's a wonderful exhibit of her work in Europe where they had primarily her photography, but they had a lot of her painting as well. It was very interesting.
Well, again, looking at some of the commentary that one comes across when you're researching something, I've also seen the possible explanation that he didn't want her to get into painting because she could be more sort of like competing with him. I mean, who knows? I mean, these works definitely draw out a lot of speculation and theories.
Yeah. And there's actually a couple of interesting comments. Gail says, the bird piece, many of the eggs are broken and look like there are fetuses inside, which I think is a really interesting.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then did Picasso unload the women, or did they finally have enough and leave him? And I'll leave that to you, Anne. I don't know the actual.
I don't know either, but I know that Marr in the end, in the relationship, had a nervous breakdown, and she became a recluse. So whether she instigated the breakup or not, the result was very devastating for her.
Yeah, and then Peter and Kevin, maybe they're comparing notes on dealing with Picasso. One is coming in, the other is on her way out. Boy, that wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. So So in that year of 1937 was, of course, the uprising of the Spanish Civil War. And at the very beginning, and up until that time in his life, Picasso had not been politically motivated or interested at all, it would appear. However, Dora Maar was very, very much so. She was very politically aware. And but when Picasso saw some of the photographs that came out of the bombing of the terrible devastation of Guernica, it was when he saw the photos that it began to like get to him. He began to respond, and he started to lay out his response in this work. And Dora Maar was very encouraging of him, and also she photographed him as he was doing this, and he did it in 35 days from beginning to end, which was super quick for such a big work. And she photographed it all as it was happening. Here you can see the sketch stage before it got filled in. And she also was said to have had some influence on the way he depicted some of the images like this, that it had the surrealist influence that she brought to Picasso in his work. And I've read that even some parts of the work were actually done by her, little parts of it. So she was definitely very influential in the Guernica work.
And she doesn't get credit, which is, if that's true, is really kind of sad and notable, right?
Yeah.
Leon makes the comment that given the same time period and the common light bulb, one can see that in Maar's painting in the context of conflict, which is, I think, a really astute comment as well.
Great.
I'm really glad that you have this photo of Guernica up, because for one thing, Anna, we've got the light bulb there that everyone can see. But if you could just look to the right side of the hands going upward like that, and if you could go back a slide to the birds in the cage, look at that with the wings upward, right?
Yes.
And then compare that to the right panel of Guernica. I think it's really. I think it's a really interesting.
Yes. This is a very complex. One could study this and talk about it in a huge way for a long time.
Yes.
Whilst this was being developed, he also did a series that were called the Weeping Women. And initially, I think it was in May he did the Weeping Women at the beginning, and it was back in the fall that he pulled out one of the women. He was going to incorporate the Weeping Women in this picture, and he decided not to, apparently, because he saw the Weeping Women was looking at the sadness they felt versus the and the mourning versus the terror they experienced at the very time of the bombing. So there was the experience of the incredible destruction and impact on them, and then afterwards the remorse and the sadness and the mourning from the tears. I've tried to tease out as my best I can in explaining that, but he was going to put the Weeping Women in here, but he didn't. But eventually he did pull out one of the works, and that he said was actually based on Dora Maar as the model. Can you see that?
Oh yeah, and first of all, she's got the dark hair. She's got, this painting, you can see Dora Maar's eyes. Here's this incredibly abstract painter, and yet when you look at like the Marie-Thérèse Walter's paintings compared to the Dora Maar painting, you can really see these little aspects of their face, the facial qualities.
Yeah.
And it's really remarkable that he's able to do that and yet maintain this kind of abstract, pseudo-cubist, work that we're looking at here. It's really great.
Yeah. Any comments on this series we just looked at, not just this piece, but the Guernica? Any comments?
Well, it's really interesting. I was working from New York, and I was working downtown, and Guernica was at MoMA. He had stated, he did the work for the 1937 Spanish Pavilion for the World's Fair, but he demanded that the work stay out of Spain as long as Franco remained in power.
Ah,
It lived at MoMA for many, many years. And so I used to work really close to there. MoMA used to have these Tuesday free afternoons. So I used to go during my lunch hour, and I would just sit and stare at that work. And for me, it really is one of the most powerful works of art that I've ever seen. It's one of the 3 great art experiences I've had in my life. And, I think you don't necessarily appreciate just how big it is, for one thing.
yeah.
You're really overwhelmed by the size of it and the power of it, and the fact that it's in, black, white, grayscale. And then you see her pictures alongside of it. It's a piece that I really urge anyone to go see. It's now in Spain, because of course it's long dead.
Yeah.
It's at the Sofia Reina, I believe, Reina Sofia. Whether you like modern art or not, and I can certainly understand where people may not like this particular type of art as a style. It still is. It's to me the greatest work of art, decrying the horrors of war. It's a work that you see, but you also hear. You hear the crying of the woman. You hear the screaming of the horse. It has this multiplicity of sensory input that I think any great work of art can have. So I really encourage people to make the pilgrimage to Spain to look at this. It's well worth it.
And the other thing about it, like a lot of our greatest works of art, you have to just think about what its impact was when it was shown, like its contemporary place. And that takes you to, that gives you that historical context. You can, he's putting this thing out when these are very fresh wounds. And we can, today think about, what it was like to be descending into the hell that the Spanish Civil War became.
Right. And as I understand it, when it was first put up, it did not have the impact it became to have. It wasn't immediately embraced or acknowledged for what we now know it to be.
Yeah, like a lot of Picasso's works,
Yeah.
this was hated. People really, they weren't ready for this. They weren't ready for its message. They weren't ready for this style of art. We look at it now in the 21st century, well, at least I look at it. I don't want to put other people's words in their mouths, but I think this is just a remarkable work of art. To me, it's one of the greatest works of art of the 20th century.
Right.
But when it first came out, people were not just like, Demoiselles d'Avignon. People hated that work, including all of, Picasso's artist friends. I mean, Picasso was not, he was not sugarcoating anything. He had a very abrasive style, and a lot of people didn't like it.
Yeah. Well, and people, of course, at the time would ask, what does all this mean? And he said, this bull is a bull and this horse is a horse. If you give a meaning to certain things in my paintings, it may be very true, but it's not my idea to give this meaning. What ideas and conclusions you have got, I obtain too, but instinctively, unconsciously, I make the painting for the painting. I paint the objects for what they are.
Right. We have a comment from Leon. He says, a few years later, the consequences of war became much more significant than just the Spanish Civil War. So I think he's right that Guernica came to represent the horrors of 20th century warfare.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a great story out that I just have to tell here, since we're not going to get to the couple that I was going to go. There's a great story that Picasso was living in Paris, and German soldiers came to his apartment, and they're tearing his apartment apart, and there's a postcard of Guernica. And one of the German officers says to him, "You did this painting?" And he turns to this officer and says, "No, you did." And you
Oh,
can say all the bad things and all the misogynist things about Picasso that you want, but just the fact that he stood up to that German officer when he could have easily have been sent to a concentration camp with that comment
yeah,
was really astounding.
Yeah.
It's one of the great stories about Picasso. So
yeah, yeah. So we're actually coming very close to our end of our time.
Yeah, there's actually a lot more to this presentation, but we knew because we have an hour for this that we would have to limit ourselves. So maybe we'll do a part two if Charlie, you, and Anna would be up for that.
really,
Be sometime in 2023 because we're already actually scheduled through the end of December. In fact, you can go on the Community Living Campaign website and see the programs that we have lined up, including one with you, Charlie. Right? We're going to be doing a program where we go to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, not to be confused with the San Francisco Unnamed Museum of Art. And Charlie, Fred Silverman, and I are going to all pick pieces. We're not going to tell each other what they are, and we're going to kind of surprise each other and have a discussion about some of the most notable works that we find in the museum. Maybe even things, Charlie, that some of us think others won't like that much.
oh, wow.
So we're going to try to surprise one another. But Charlie, Anna, any last words on Partners in Art?
Well, I have a last word in about Picasso that reading a book at the moment. So is Charlie, called Picasso's War, and it's a new biography that's just come out, and it is fantastic. And
Wow.
he's not just talking about Guernica, by the way, or any particular war. It's a broader thing than that. It's a biography of his life, and it's really interestingly done.
It's fascinating. And if you like modern art, it will just open up, think about how most of us who like modern art think about Matisse and how much we love Matisse. Just the story of people burning copies of Matisse's paintings because they hated so much. It's fascinating. It's a great read.
And it's really the story of how modern art came to the US too, from Paris, from the shift in the center of gravity.
From baguettes to bagels.
Yes.
I've heard it called. Yeah, that sounds great. Maybe we'll want to do a discussion of that book. It brings to mind another favorite work of, I think, Charlie, you and I both love this photograph by Versailles of Picasso in his apartment with his stove, in the middle of World War II.
Yeah.
And he was helping Versailles would go over there to stay warm. The furnace, yes.
Yep. Yeah, Sarah says the furnace. Yeah, and it's a great photograph.
So, a couple last thoughts. It is Open Studio season, and we were talking at the very beginning of the show before many of you joined about the Open Studios that ArtSpan is putting on in San Francisco right now. You should go to their website, check out places to go, and I may be publicizing an Open Studio of an artist who has shown his work on Art Viewing Adventures. I need to make sure it's okay with him to do that. But if you get my Friday email, I'll put some information about that in there. And if you have thoughts on maybe open studios you've been going to, I'd love to hear about that. So feel free to email me about that or share it in chat. And we're going to be back. I think we're going to be back in 3 weeks because of just the way the calendar works. We're always the second and the fourth Monday of the month, and our next program will be that one I just talked about with Charlie and Fred Silverman that we're all working on right now. But Charlie, Anna, thank you very much for coming back to Art Viewing Adventures, doing this discussion. It's always a lot of fun working with you guys.
Likewise.
And everybody stay safe, and we'll see you in 3 weeks with another great Art Viewing Adventures program.